SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. I'm your host, Todd Kirk. I'm joined by my ever-present co-host, Casey Trujillo, and we have an awesome guest on. We have one of our great friends who was joking beforehand that he was just some guy that that owes me money, and so I forced him to come on. But we're glad to have you here. We have Roger Mendez on, who is a global leader in strategic programs and customer success and operations and strategies at Cisco. Roger is probably one of the nicest and also one of the coolest thought leaders I know, so I'm super pumped to have him on the show. Roger, welcome to SaaS Therapy, my friend.
Oh, thank you. It's always great to be, I consider you guys friends in the tech space. And so, and obviously we go get lunch and it's a great time. So just even friends in general. So really excited to be on today and talk with you guys.
Todd, this is our first repeat guest. Now, it's not like we offended other people that have been on our show. We've had, 40 something guests, but this is the first guest we've asked to come back. So shortly, you're going to understand why we've done that with Roger, but we're going to start out with something super interesting, Roger, is a lot of people don't know this, is you just recently went back to school. What course did you take? Why did you decide to do it? Explain to our audience why this is going to be kind of our theme of today's episode.
Yeah, really excited about that, Casey. So especially it's kind of the hot topic that everyone's talking about right now with AI. So the nice thing is Cisco has a partnership with Cornell University. And so they're actually, there are some courses that they're providing for really accelerating your career, whether it's in leadership management or AI strategy, which I took, or other courses. But the nice thing is the way it works is it's a graduate certificate program. And so you're going to look at 6 different modules that you'll complete over 2 weeks at a time. And then you have live discussions with Cornell University teachers in regards to talking a little bit about this hot topic that I was mentioning with AI strategy. And so you'll talk and learn a lot about like intro to AI, large language models, the future of AI, the social impacts of AI, and starting to focus on how do you start infrastructuring that within the organization that you work at. So I raised my hand and Cisco sponsored and paid for the schooling. So it was a great opportunity and finished not too long ago.
So are you cramming for tests? Are professors boring? You have the funny kid in the class. Like, what is it like at Cornell University in one of these certificates that you're doing? What same type of atmosphere as these Zoom meetings? Like, describe a little bit more about the setting and the atmosphere.
Well, I mean, I didn't know what I was signing up for because the very first day you had somebody asking, can I use AI to do my AI homework? So you didn't know what kind of cohort that you'd have, but honestly, it was exciting. So one thing that I really appreciate is they're really trying to stay on top of the trends. And so some of the content is refreshed over the next, whether it's like monthly or every few months, but they really try to stay on top of that. But the way it works is you'll have 2 live sessions. So they're about 1.5 to 2 hour sessions where you'll hear from some of your peers. You'll talk with some of your mentors that you have within your cohorts as well. But you'll have a professor that usually teaches on site at Cornell University and talks a little bit about some of those impacts with the AI. So that's something that I've really liked. They give you a few different assignments. You do some testing in it as well, but the assignments are really trying to get you back to your organization to start thinking strategically on how you can incorporate maybe some safeguards around AI, some new ideas. And so really starting to help you learn the materials to get that into action. That's something that I really like. Actually, Cornell's a big proponent of this is if you get stuck along the way, like they encourage you to call your teachers so you can do something in the moment to help you out instead of waiting for the next class session to start to be able to ask that question.
Roger, I really, my first reaction was I want to understand the curriculum and everything that they're teaching, because I want to nerd out on like what does an AI program look like at a university, especially as someone who's now been in the workforce for a while. But maybe before we jump in and talk through like what are they actually talking about in these programs and teaching about today, what has been the most practical takeaway for you now that you've had a chance to go and learn about AI? What are some of the things that were the most eye-opening of like, wow, this is really applicable about how I should be thinking about my job right now?
Yeah, Great question. I would say, I love this quote by Mark Benioff at Salesforce, and he talks about how dysfunction's worst nightmare is being able to diagnose something, reassemble it in a better way, and make it better for everyone. And so I think one of the eye-opening things about AI for me was, I think, the first day that I attended class, like I remember my teacher saying, like, we're potentially in the biggest event in human history right now. And it's kind of happening right now with AI. And so the thing that I took away is he said, like, we're basically at a coin flip, if you call it that, where it's like basically, we can create some self-fulfilling prophecies where like, no, AI is dangerous. We shouldn't be doing this. Like, we're not ready for it. And so putting some safeguards. But the question he was challenging the students is, do you want to be active participants in this decision? Because what's going to end up happening is if we have fear and stop this stuff, then the totalitarian governments or the bad criminal actors, they're going to start getting involved in AI. And what's going to come to it is like, we're going to have the rule followers of AI, but they're going to end up having worse AI than the people that are using it in ineffective ways. And so like the biggest thing is like, hey, we can relax, we can all do this together. But like the poetic use case of AI is how AI is really helping human intelligence, but also the human potential. And so I think that was one of the biggest things for me where I was like, wow, like, because I think there's a lot of things going on with AI right now, but I think it's just kind of this single event where there's so many things happening, but we have a role and the opportunity to be active participants in it as well.
Okay, Roger, we know that you did not teach the class. You went to the class. We understand that you're a
He's
learning
smart
model.
enough, though. He could totally.
He's smart enough. He could.
I'm going to start calling him Dr. Mendez from now on.
I like
Professor
that.
Mendez, for sure.
I
Yeah.
like that. Okay. And we know that your own personal learning language model around AI is increasing every day as you learn new things and you apply new things. But man, I'll tell you, I'm gonna be little bit vulnerable here. Is like, do I really need AI in every freaking piece of software that I utilize? And everybody comes out with AI, and I'm like, isn't it just all doing the same thing? It's just a different flavor. Like, help someone who's starting to become apathetic towards AI. Keep me curious about AI. Like, help me out here because I can't stand AI right now because that's the only thing everybody leads with. And I'm like, I see no difference between what you're doing is with what someone else is doing with what someone else is doing. So help me get some peace around that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I mean, it's interesting because one of the things that I've learned in the class is like there was a section where we talked about safeguarding AI, and there was a quote that I really liked that I'll read to you guys that it basically came from 1960, and it was around creating better principles on how we act as human behavior, but it's now getting really related back to like machines and AI. And it said, we had better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire. And so I think, like, as you were mentioning, people get so caught up in AI where it's like, hey, I want to be part of this, this evolution and this storm. But the thing is, like, are they doing AI to just look busy? And like foundationally is like, because the thing with AI is like the AI is only as good as the data and the information that you can provide it. And so like I go back to companies that are using AI to say, hey, we need AI. But when it starts reading some of the human behavior or some of the capturing of how data is being collected today at the company, like it may not be outputting the right materials because it's really not getting the right fed information. And so I think that's kind of the ground level thing where it's like people want to get in AI, but it's like it's really a reflection of how foundational some of the infrastructure that you have at your company to really be effective and start building out systems. I love this quote all the time where it talks about how like wherever you see consistency, that is systems in place. And so really like I think that's the efficiency of AI. When you can have that system, it's going to help you output it that much quicker. And so I think that's where it can be beneficial, but I think everyone's trying to jump in and that's the thing that worries me. It's like you can do it, but is it going to really give you the right output that you're looking for?
Yeah, so because there's at least with AI, there's two things that I hear a lot of times with people that are really concerned about it. One is either they can't trust the results they're getting from the AI because the data model is bad, and the AI can only be as good as the information that it's fed. So if you have a bunch of garbage data, really outdated information, things that are incorrect or piecemeal data sources, then it's gonna give you really crummy results, and that's a really common problem. The other side of it that I hear though is that people get frustrated that they feel like AI is taking and doing the work that they are used to or custom or even want to do. So your point about like, are we designing the machine to fulfill the purpose we want? Like the funniest meme I ever saw was, I want AI to do my laundry and fold it and wash my dishes so I have time to create art and, make beautiful things. And instead we made AI that creates content and art, so all I have time to do is my laundry and my dishes. And so like the thing that I think is really worrisome to some people is they're afraid to approach AI because they see it as a threatening to like what they, or it's a threat to the way they spend their time or the things that they feel like they're good at as a human. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious if that was a comment that came up of like the fear around the role AI plays with us in the workplace and in our relationships in order to make sure that we're utilizing it in a way that helps maximize human thriving rather than having it, basically diminish what we're doing as humans.
Yeah, that's a great point and call out, just because I think of it from two different aspects. And this is something that the class really challenged, where, part of the AI capability is, like you were talking about, looking at those data foundations and being able to look at the effectiveness of that. Is we did a case study where we were looking at an organization that was providing, free services to some customers versus not other customers. And so like the AI modeling couldn't really distinguish what was like the benefits of doing that for a customer or not. And so it wasn't really able to diagnose like, hey, this customer is getting this for free versus this customer that's paid for the service. But it was started to give some sort of bias around, well, this customer spent more, so they should get better treatment, instead of both customers getting kind of those equal services parts as well. So it's just interesting that the AI starts kind of creating its own like command line about it, where he starts thinking intuitively like, oh yeah, like it should be like this. But in reality, it was some of the bias, because we are humans and sometimes we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And so I think that's part of it as well. And also one thing that it really challenged me in the course as well that I really enjoyed is, let's say you have a customer that you're working with that has lapsed on the renewal just because they have some big thing that's happening within their organization. Like, would the AI just churn off the system because they didn't pay their bill or didn't pay that service? Or like as humans, like at a company, we have that relationship and rapport with the customer that we're like, oh, we're going to extend you for 60 days because we understand that life happens
Right.
sometimes. And so I think that's where it's interesting, where like you kind of get like, I think of like the AI is like more of the reasonable part of our brain, where it's very logic and like, hey, let's get things done. But like the emotional side of it is more of like, hey, we want to be, like you're mentioning, I want to be more artistic. I want to spend more time with the things that I like to cultivate. But like in a business setting, like, is AI still giving us that ability where it's like, hey, we're going to streamline and automate workflows, and we're going to give you more time to spend with your customers and create those dynamic relationships? Or is it going to be vice versa, where like the AI is being relied as like, you have these chat bots, you have the technical scale pieces, and then are you just focusing on trying to fix the data side of things just to catch up the AI with it? And you're kind of missing the plot at that point, right? So that's kind of what I worry about a little bit.
Rogers, you're going through this course and you're understanding these different use cases, things about AI that you're like, I never thought about it that way. What would be one or two messages or one or two learnings that you had during this course that you're like, people need to know this? Like,
Yeah.
this is something, and it doesn't need to be that it's a right or wrong way to do something. It's just, this is information that people should be thinking about with AI. What's one or two lessons learned that we're just like, oh man, everyone should know this?
Yeah. I will say probably two that really, really stood out to me. So the very first one was, and I think I called this out at the Customer Success Collective, but I thought it was such an interesting stat where Professor Dutra, his name is at Cornell University, talked about this, and he spent years in consulting. But he said that really AI can't replicate what creates high performing teams. And they said that like even high performing teams don't know what creates high performing teams. So you can go to those teams and say, hey, what is it about your team that makes it so, effective? And they can say, well, it's the chemistry, or it's the connection, or it's, we work at an efficient rate doing this. Like, and so I think that's the hardest thing about AI, is it like looks to solve those things, but there's some things that it really can't do. And so I think that's the thing that's really a learning or a takeaway for me, that there's some sort of component around strong partnerships and connection and human interaction that like we build these amazing teams, and we see it all the time, whether it's in organization, in sports, in communities, where like it's just the right personas and people that get together, and there's trust and cultivation that's built out. And so I think that was really cool, just because it really taught me about that human element. And then probably the second thing I'll call out that I just really loved, and it's from an education side of the business, but like we talk about this in customer success and education all the time, is like, how do we scale? How do we scale? How do we scale? And so, if you guys are ever interested, Khan Academy is doing some really cool stuff with AI. And so one of the things that we learned is there was a study done in 1984 by Benjamin Bloom, and it was basically talking about the efficiency of education. And so he calls it the 2 sigma deviation. And so basically what it stands for is there's a normal bell curve, and it talks about that if a teacher is assigned to 30 students, like this is where a student should be learning at. And it was pretty moderate, intentional bell curve, but it talked about that when they saw that studies where a student got one-to-one tutoring interaction, that significantly increased to 2 deviations. So what that really meant is you could get a standard student to be an exceptional student, and you can get a below average student to become an above average student. And so I thought that was something that was so interesting. And so they did this study in 1984, and they're like, hey, what can we do with this data? Well, obviously you can't scale, because you can't assign somebody one-to-one interactions and stuff. And so what a Khan Academy is doing is they've built out this AI agent where if kids are going to school online, it helps the students start reasoning with the AI chatbot to understand, well, hey, I got this equation wrong, or hey, I got this problem wrong. And it starts helping the student identify what was the reasoning behind why they thought that specific way. And they're starting to see studies where the students starting to excel on this, because they feel like they have a tutor that's helping them like identify not only specific tactical situations, but like, hey, what should I be studying in 10th grade? Hey, what should I be starting to look at college admissions? Or, hey, let's write a story together. And like the AI is like, should it be a horror story? Should it be an exciting story? And so I think that's something that's really, really cool. But what I saw a Khan Academy do is take that extra step where they're giving the thinking ability to the AI to be able to think, and the reasoning of why the student possibly got it wrong, instead of just trying to output an answer. And so that's something that I think is super cool, that like we're starting to see that. I'm hoping that, one of the big takeaways is people are just eventually going to start growing and learning at an accelerated rate.
Mm. Okay. I love both of these, and I want to drill into each of them, Roger, if we can. So
Yeah.
The learning piece, for me, that's been probably one of my favorite components of AI, is the fact that I can quickly and easily have something talk to me like a human would, to work through problems that I wouldn't understand otherwise. So I feel like I can get up to speed on a topic or a concept so much faster than I could in the past, which is awesome. But the first half of your statement, of this idea that there's certain things that humans are really good, high performing teams are really good at, that other people don't recognize, or that AI is not good at.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to my mind there, and I'm curious to get your reaction to this. I feel like technology, the direction of technology for probably the last 20 years, has caused us to be more and more and more dependent on it in a way that isolates us from human connection. There's plenty of reasons why you could say social media has harmed our ability to form true human connections with people, as an example. And what I worry about, or what I think is a potential miss with AI, based off what you've said there, is that where AI gets really exciting to me is if it enables us to rekindle our human relationships in a way that we haven't been able to as a society for the last 20 years, because that's a place where we could really, really, I mean, just imagine how much better it would be if we spent all of our time building human connection. And if AI can facilitate that, awesome. But it could also go the opposite direction, and it could become a crutch that causes us to isolate ourselves even more. So like, there's this massive opportunity for us to kind of rekindle the human spirit that technology has kind of been snuffing out for the last couple of decades with AI. But how do we make sure that we are able to get people moving in a direction that is healthy and positive for society, and not negative and cause us to retreat back into things that are even worse? That's like big and theoretical, but that's where my mind went. I'm like, so often the AI conversation feels so like tactical and practical. And I want to be like, everything you got me here is getting me excited to think about, like, what is the impact that it's going to have on us as individuals and as a society overall.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's something to think about, just because there is a great TED talk that like we listened to, part of our curriculum, where it was like the 3 problems that we may run into with AI. And it talks about like the gorilla problem, where they say like when you develop something that's smarter than the species, like there's something that's at risk, right? So like it talked about how like the component of like gorillas were kind of like the kings of the jungle, and they developed like all these capabilities, and like they kind of helped evolutionize like what it was to be able to like grow and learn. And now they're the ones that are stuck in the zoo. And so like that's the thing, where it's like this fear of like, hey, like AI can like really, kind of maybe impede some of what we're going through. But I do want to validate what you're mentioning, just because I've had this conversation a lot with friends, where like even back in the day, like I remember like when I wanted to ask a girl or friends to hang out, I had to pick up the phone, a landline, call their house, and then I'd usually run into a dad that's like, "Who's this?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's Roger." And like, "Can Sarah can't come hang out?" And it helped me build some dynamics of like, "Hey, I'm gonna go after something hard. I'm gonna have to show up as my best self." And I think I see that a lot in technology still. Like I remember working with a customer, one of our enterprise customers in the Midwest, where, you know, my VP at the time said, "Hey, I'm going to send you on site with the customer. We know that they're at risk of attrition, and we want to just figure out what's going on with them. So I want you to start working with them." And there's that human component of understanding and the empathy side of like, "Hey, what are some of the roadblocks that you've been running into? What are some of the adoption blockers?" Because if I just send in an AI chatbot or something to go ahead and remediate the problem, what is the impact of the customer? Like, do they felt like they were heard, valued? And so I think there's something to be said about that. Now, I think if we marry the two, like maybe like an AI could help me with a transcript of what I should be thinking about, key points as I pick up the phone to call somebody. Maybe there's some, balance of or harmonization of both. But I think it's a great topic that you bring up, just because we talk about automation all the time. I'm just worried that AI is going to automate everything. And there's that component of like, hey, you know, if I run into a problem that AI can't solve for me, like, is it going to really get me stuck as just an individual? Right. So I think that's something that's a really key call out on that.
It's been fascinating as we work. So Brainstorm, we do a lot of help with SaaS organizations in launching out their AI and helping their customers, their end users, actually adopt that AI. And as we have these conversations and we get to be previewed to the customer, it's interesting. At the start, everybody was selling time savings with AI, like buy our AI, because, just think about how much time you spend in just doing a follow-up meeting recap and then sending out the email notes and this and this and this and this, right? And so that was kind of like the first wave and everyone was buying in. But now I'm hearing from CROs and CIOs that you got to show me more than time savings.
Yeah.
Are we ready for that yet? Has AI made its way into just not just saving us time? Because what they're finding out is that, well, if I save Todd time, and I'm not going to call out Todd because our boss listens to this, but if Todd saves 5 hours from sending emails, well, does Todd just use that 5 hours to go skiing up at Snow Basin, because now it just saved him his time and he doesn't have to do that part of his job? Like, how people are
Snow
asking
Basin is too far. I wouldn't drive
Snow
off.
Basin is too far. Okay. Yeah. What are other ROIs that we're not thinking about, or has that not yet been really determined on, and how AI could help?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like we're kind of at that inflection point right now, where it's like it's all or been around time saving and automation, right? That's been kind of the primary use case of AI. And I think now, like, we're starting to look at, well, now that as we start understanding more of AI's capabilities, what can it do to help us accelerate and scale? But also, like, how can we make sure that people's time is more efficient? And so I think that's something that like we're going to start seeing more in the tech space, is like, as we start building out these use cases around AI, like how does that increase or change potentially the human intervention of our own use cases within what we do at work, right? So I think that's something that we're going to start seeing a lot more, because I think the tagline for AI is like, AI is here to maximize the realization of human values. but what do those values look like within your organization? Because AI doesn't know what they are. Like I can obviously put those into AI to say, hey,
Right.
at Cisco, we're going to be more, aligned, and we're going to have more adoption efforts. But like when it comes to the human value element of it, where it's like the component of understanding like, hey, human behavior provides information about human values. So what are the behaviors within the organization that we can start building out use cases where AI is going to maximize more than just time efficiency, but it's going to help us in some of the things that are foundational to us as a company and an organization. And so I think that's where we're starting to see kind of that interest really lie a little bit. I do get worried just because I think we're still kind of focusing on like, how do we become that leader in AI? Like, obviously there's organizations that are trying to lead that effort, and it's still like, we're going to just double, triple down on time saving. But I think we're starting to see more use cases that organically happen.
Mm. I mean, essentially, it sounds like what you're saying is AI is just a reflection of us. It's like
Yeah.
it's a shadow of what we are and who we are, and it's only gonna reflect back to us things that we as a species are able to provide to it. So whatever
Yeah.
information it has is just reflecting back to us. So it's just a reflection of whoever we are. So whatever you provide in your AI model is going to be a reflection of you. And then the part that's interesting there, and I don't know if this is kind of where you're going with this or not, but is there a point where and this is one of the things that I think a lot of people get worried about, is that AI just becomes our full on agent, our representative, and because it is such a good reflection of us that my AI agent knows me, how I think, how I'd operate, and would be able to act as my agent on my behalf without me being there at all. So now I could go to Snow Basin every day if I wanted to and just go skiing. And so like
That made my mind hurt, man. That made my
right.
mind hurt. That whole
So
thing.
but I
Isn't
think
there a
that's the
movie
part.
about that?
Yes, I'm
There's
sure.
a movie on that one, right?
Yeah, of course. And it's kind of a scary idea to a lot of people. And that's the part that I think when it comes down to it, is that the next wave, or is there a better way to think about AI beyond, well, right now it's saving my time, or right now it's automating tasks for me? Is the next step, now it's representing me because it knows how I think, it knows how I would make choices, and it's going to do things that I would have done if I were there. If I weren't there, it can actually act as my representative and my agent. Or is there a different stage or a different direction that it could take that is maybe less scary or more productive or more exciting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I actually, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because like I'd actually want to call out something from Cornell that my professor really challenged me on, where we were given this course description of like, hey, how could you improve a process within your organization? And so like I was talking about, well, maybe I want to create some sort of scaling engine where we have AI chatbots to be able to like help support our customers, especially if it's frontline issues where we can get to more detailed reps. And so I'll read you guys this quote, but this was actually feedback based off my homework. And I really loved what my professor said. He said, suppose your organization deploys an AI-driven customer support chatbot. If the AI system is trained on biased data, it might generate responses that are less effective or unfair to certain groups of customers. For example, if the training data predominantly reflects interactions from one demographics group, the chatbot might not handle queries from other groups as effectively. This could result in suboptimal support experiences for those unrepresented groups. And my mind was just blown. I was like, oh, we're not there yet. Like, this is so, like, it's just so many things that he called out that I'm like, yeah, like there's so many things to like worry about, like not worry about and necessarily of like scary, but more of like worry about of like, hey, like, at Cisco, we have, public sector customers that have very different processes than enterprise customers, or customers that are really focusing on more data center driven outputs in like our demographics in like APJC versus customers that are maybe in Europe. And so I think those are things that really started to make me think about it a lot. And so to answer your question, Todd, I think the biggest thing is like, I think we're not there yet, fingers crossed, where it's like, it's going to think like me, act like me, just because I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think there's some exciting components of AI where like, especially with like these LLMs, these large language models, that they can start understanding behavior and start understanding like, outputs, and being more of a trusted advisor to you when it comes to looking for outputs in regards to data and insight. And that's something that I'm seeing with AI, that it's starting to learn kind of how we want to interact with it a little bit. So, so for example, I know somebody that was talking about some medical questions with like ChatGPT, and it's starting to show empathy to the individual where it says, hey, like, this person, I know we've talked for a while over the last few months. So if you need anything else, let me know that I'm here for you. I know that you're going through a really hard time. And it's just really cool because the chat GPT is really recollected the memory of the interactions that it's had. So I think there's cool things that we're going to start seeing like that. But I think it's just trying to be a resource.
So this is a question for either one of you on this one. So every company has their own culture, right? I've been in sales my whole life, and there's some sales culture where it's just about the bottom line. Like, you go hit your quota, you go make your number, and we celebrate you and however you do that. And sometimes it gets that term of a bro culture, right? Like, just go sell it, bro. And you just go make it happen. And then I've been in sales culture where it's like, hey, we do right by our customers. We try to understand what our customers want. And if we do those things, then at the end of the day, we'll get benefit because, people refer us. We'll just work in a better way. How in the world do you create these models that adapt to your culture? Because again, it's just giving you back information that it's reading from. So how do you get the human emotion where, Roger, that one example you just barely gave us, someone was empathetic, but there's a lot of people I know that aren't empathetic. And so, right, like how did they discuss this at all in the courses? Like, how do you strip out the person that's feeding the model of their biases and the way that they lean? Like, how do you strip that out? And how do you start to get that in there? Like, you know what I'm saying on that?
Now, I don't know, before you answer, I don't know if this, I'll tell you what I thought, Casey, that's funny is, when you're a kid and you're in school, and you'd tell your friend about a weird dream that you had, and then they'd interpret that dream.
Yeah.
It almost makes it sound like what you're saying is like, are we going to get to where people are AI response interpreters? Like, seriously. How did the AI responded to me about this way? What do you think it says to me about what the AI thinks about how I think? Right? Yes. It's like, are we going to have AI dream interpreters of like, the AI just hallucinated this thing? What does that say about me? Sorry, that was just where my
mind. It's so funny. And like, to even add on top of that, like, I was laughing so hard because I was having this discussion with my friend where he was talking about how, like, he's noticing that, like, there talks about like people that are like Gen Zers, right? And so he's like, Gen Z are the type of people that like used to interact and like they go buy a cool video game and they're like playing the video game, trying to defeat the boss. And now our next generation is watching that person trying to defeat the boss and be like, oh, this is so cool. I can't believe you're doing this. That's awesome. And now our current generation
that makes me feel so good.
Watching the guy that's trying to beat the game. So like, it's just this evolution of like that, it makes me laugh, but also like, I think of it from an AI perspective, like Casey, going back to what you say is like, I think we're trying to expect the AI outputs to understand like what the human interventions and values are. But like, I think part of it's going to be kind of a trial and error to create those language models to be able to start noticing those really fundamental things that really create some of that, human element into it and understand the human behavior. And so I think even at Cisco, the way that we're starting to approach things is like really looking at like, how do we start looking, because we hear companies talk about this from a culture perspective of like, hey, what are our culture? What are our values? But like, what are the values within like specific segments of the business? And so like, you'll start seeing AI start looking at some of those components where it's like, oh, there's a values conflict here. Like, which way should I lean? And I'm not saying like a values conflict of like, oh, like one's good or bad. It's more of like, hey, what's the higher priority of the effectiveness of this action that I need to take? And so I think we're going to start seeing that more. But I'm starting to see it at Cisco where like even in customer success, we're like, hey, we want to make sure we're validating the customer. We're creating awareness around the organization, that we have learning and resources for the customer. We're measuring utilization. But one of the biggest ones that I love is like, we fully want the customer to feel like there's an embedded process. So if we ripped out the technology or software tomorrow, would the customer feel that impact? And so like, if the AI can start learning what that feels like, I think we're starting to get a little bit of steps ahead of like, hey, we eventually should get there, right? So
So good, Roger. I'll tell you a funny anecdote that happened to me the other day that I think is relevant here. You mentioned the idea of trying to make sure that we get more empathetic, and you mentioned even how like your friend who had used ChatGPT and it was tried to empathize with what they were going through. So just the other day though, it was funny because I was driving home with my kids, and I like to use the voice command in ChatGPT where it'll talk back and forth with you, which is
yeah,
that's a fun experience. And so
yeah.
my kids were asking me about what you call different groups of animals. It's a group of crows is called a murder, and like a group of lions is called a pride. And then while we're driving out to my house, there's a big family of deer. So my kids were like, "What do you call a family of deer?" And I was like, "I don't know, probably just a herd." But maybe it has a cool name. So I decided to ask ChatGPT, and I said, "What do you call a group of deer?" And you know what its response was?
What?
And say in a friendly, jovial tone, it just said, "What?" As in, it thought I was staging a joke. What do you call a group of deer? What? As it was really odd to have this. I'm trying to talk to this AI, and I just wanted it to tell me a group of deer is called a herd, which is like super lame. That's what it is. That's what the answer was. But I had to then clarify back to the AI. I'm not telling you a joke. I literally want to know the answer. And then it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I misinterpreted your tone. And it's like, what the? This is so weird. So that's there's something too that I think that's interesting is like, do we want AI to try to empathize to us to a point where as it's trying to understand us, it's guessing and accurately figuring out, because it's like it thought I was telling it a joke, so it responded as if it was my audience, whereas I was actually trying to get it to tell me information. And I don't know, it just raised this question for me when we think about AI. What is our goal? What do we ultimately want it to do? Do we want it to be a reflection of us and have it interact with us and treat us like a human would treat us? Or do we just want it to be a tool that helps us to get stuff done faster? And that was I don't know, it was like a weird moment for me of, I didn't expect it to think I was telling it a joke, but it thought I was telling it a joke.
Yeah, I want to share some thoughts on that because I love what you're saying there, because I feel like if there was this capability, I wish that, and I hope that in the future, like, I think two things of it, that like, I hope that AI can take more of a neutral stance, and not meaning like in topic or conversation, because I think those are super important things where it gives us information that we're looking for. But like, if I were to ask the AI, like, hey, is this good? I hope the AI would respond, I don't know. What's your definition of good? Define good.
Mm.
And like, I'd be like, well, it's maybe working towards this and stuff like that. And be like, okay, I don't know. Does it sound effective? Like, does it? Like, so hoping that the AI can be some sort of sounding board. But I think for me, like, especially that experience that you shared, I'm like, the thought that popped in my head, I'm like, 5, even 8 years ago, like the AI capabilities that we had, like I remember just pressing 0 a bunch of times to get to the customer support agent instead of going through the automated prompts. And so like, my thing is like, especially as leadership, like, especially when we see a big momentum change, like usually leaders will be like, hey, what caused that shift? What caused that change? And I think that's something I hope that we talk about more in AI, because I've seen like, it was very like, it was very starting out phase versus now it's like quickly ramped up at a very efficient rate. But what created that jump, right? Obviously we can talk about like, well, it was, chat GPT and it was understanding of large language models. Yes. But like, how do we make sure that we look at that and say like, okay, what worked, what didn't? Like, how do we reflect back on that? So I think that's something important, especially when you're talking about that joke. I'm like, I remember asking Siri like jokes back in the day, and I'm like, yeah, how have we gotten to where it's now understanding like my tone of voice to think it's a joke or not, right? So
Well, before we close, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to come up with a punchline for the joke that I wasn't asking it to
Okay,
tell me.
and
So
then let us know
I'm
that
going to
one.
do that. So if I go offline for a second, that's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
trying to
you
figure
do
out.
that, Todd. So Roger, we've laughed, we've had our head hurt, but you started with a question that your professor asked at the beginning that I want to kind of come back to is, hey, do you want to be part of this? Right? Was kind of what his message was. Do you want to be part of one of the most momentous change in our world? So we've thought a lot of theory. We've thought a lot of just what ifs. But if I wanted to say, okay, I've messed around a little bit with AI. I've maybe asked it to say, hey, I'm going to Arizona for the weekend, plan me out, a trip itinerary, right? I think everybody's used that one. What would be some practical things that I could start to do today to take away that fear a little bit about AI, or if I want to just start to participate, what would be some tactical recommendations you'd have?
Yeah, I love that, Casey. I feel like, to come to a close with what my professor said at the beginning of the course, like what he said at the end of the course was, I think, even just as poetic, where he said, hey, we need to relax and we need to hope for the best, all of us together. But he said, we need to fight like hell. We want to make sure that we have guardrails, we have reasonable regulations, and we create positive use cases for AI. So I feel like when it comes to the individual sense, like, I think just getting curious with it, like, it's nice because like AI, like, I think you don't have to go 0 to 100 within a day. Like, one thing I even challenge people that are just getting started, I'm like, hey, like, write out like what you normally would do day in and day out with work, but like, look at AI to say, hey, like, hey, I wrote this paragraph, like, are there any grammatical mistakes, anything that I should clean up? Like, little things like that gets you more comfortable with like the software and understanding of it a little bit. Like, automation is such a big term in the industry right now. So like, how does automation kind of combine with AI? Because like, if just because I'm helping somebody do something quicker, like maybe it's not necessarily sharing those insights of why it's doing quicker. And so I think AI is really cool in that aspect. But kind of a fun little prompt that my teacher challenged us, because we all had ChatGPT accounts and we were using it. You can ask AI this, or ChatGPT. It's like, based off of what you know about me, create an image about my life. And it was so interesting because like I started noticing that like it had like the Bolivian flag because of my mom's heritage, and it showed me with Cisco and stuff. And so the cool thing about it, and I don't think it's something that we should fear, but it's more of something that it's like, hey, the AI is taking accountability of like what we put in, and it's also reflecting on like, yeah, this is something that's really important to this individual. So I just say stay curious. Like, that's the biggest thing, and hope for the best. Like, I think that's what we're in this next evolution, but just, let it not something really scare you, but lean into it, and just use some opposite action into it to say, hey, I want to get more familiar. And the more I use it, like I had a leader at Cisco challenge me one time where he said, because I'm like, hey, I don't know if I'm ready for this position. And he's like, define being ready. Like, you just kind of go into it, you start learning it, you get better at it. And so that's kind of the same advice, as I'm just like kind of lean into it.
That's so good, Roger. Well, we always ask our guests one last question at the end of every episode, which I'm going to ask you too. But
Okay.
the main one that we always ask is, this is SaaS therapy. So every good SaaS therapy session ends with homework, with an assignment to do one thing differently, one improvement that you could make. So if you could give one piece of advice, especially in this topic around AI, to our audience today, what would your homework be for folks today?
My tagline would be challenging the listener to say, what do you need to do in the short term to show that you've made progress? So like, if you listen to this podcast today, what do you feel like you need to do within the next couple of days or weeks to show that you're starting to lean in to a little bit more of AI? And so maybe that's even like not actually using AI. Maybe you're curious about this course. Maybe you're curious about understanding what AI strategy classes are out there. I took it at Cornell, but there's also a lot of classes that are starting to pop up, especially in business applications. So I would just challenge the person to have a goal of like, what do you need to do in the short term to show that you've made progress after listening today?
Oh, so good. Roger, here's my last question.
Okay.
What do you call a group? What do you call a group of deer?
What?
a buck at list, because seeing
Oh!
that many deer at once is something special. So.
I try to do it in the AI tone, but I think I failed miserably.
If AI is a reflection of the person, that was a perfect reflection of Todd. Todd would have scripted that one. That would have been he would have come
I know.
up with. So
is that not like it's like the best dad joke ever? It's so lame. I love it. Awesome. Roger, thank you as always. You're amazing, my friend. And I look forward to. I think you've earned back your $20. Thank you for the time.
Yeah.
SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.